Welcome to Shrimp Coverlet. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for the third in a 5-part series as we chronicle our journey through the Hungry Ghost Festival by Jen Campbell. This is the third video, which is the review of the entire collection for this series. Now, if you do not know, Jen Campbell is a fellow booktuber as well as an internationally renowned poet. A link to both her booktube channel and where you can get this collection will be included in the description below. So what is it? The Hungry Ghost Festival is a collection of 20 poems stretched over 31 pages by the incomparable Jen Campbell. 3 great quotes. Well, this is my channel and my review, so we're going to go with 4 great quotes. First, from Birdhouse on page 16, the opening line, "One of those Sunday afternoons no one knows how to use." It's a very grounded line. It's a line that presents itself in reality on a weekly basis, right? And I think that level of familiarity is something which can immediately grab you and pull you into a poem. 2, from the kissing page to that, page 17, Angel Metal. Our woolen scarves touch our noses, catch our breath like cloth balloons. We dig our feet into the soil and stamp down into the very deep. Somewhere below, the river sleeps with a lady screeching. She has arms that could carry boulders to the edge of cliffs. We wait for her to throw us down. I think that's just a gorgeous example of writing. It flows very well. It's got rhythm. It's something that you can read without stuttering, even the first read through, which is something that is very underrated in poetry. Third, from Springtime Catch on page 24. The first stanza reads as such: "Up here we're fierce friends with the sea. If it calls our name, we let it hollow us out. At sunset near the jetty, you can spot the teenagers by their thrown clothes, their sandpaper skin half buried in the wind, the girls on their backs, the still tied out. Used wrappers like lollipop covers, and the car parks filled to the hilt with rusty old trucks borrowed from middle-aged fathers, the boys and their limpid hair." What a way to set a scene. And the 4th quote from this collection is probably my favorite, and that is the first stanza from Lobster Girl, this on page 28. "When we think of beginnings. When I was a bairn and my folks took me to the circus, showed me to the clowns their red faces, bought me blue candy floss that melted all over my hands. These hands could fly, their bandages unraveling. I could be a bird, I said. I had the hooked nose for it. Shot out of the cannon. Boom, baby. It was only later I discovered I was born out of the sea." I think that's just a great... I don't know how to encapsulate why I like that stanza probably the most of any stanza in this collection, but I do. Sell it with a sentence. Jen Campbell deftly pushes us along a score of poems where touch is acceptance, acceptance is intimacy, and intimacy can be a moment suspended in the forever of a running river. What are the 3 best things about this collection? 1, there is hardly a moment to breathe as you read through this collection. And as I stated in, I believe it was the first video in this series, I had to do a lot of rereading of this, not because of the fault of the poems themselves, but because this is a type of poetry in which I am not very well versed. But there's even taking your time to stop and reread a poem, there's very little time to catch your breath as you move from one poem to the next through this entire thing. Number 2, and I don't know how exactly to qualify or quantify this, but this collection seems suspended in time. It does not feel old, and it does not feel new. It feels very now, right? That idea of present is one that is presented in each of these poems. And 3, there is never a point in this score of poems where you feel you are with a poet who is out of their depth, which is very difficult to pull off. I communicated in, again, I believe the first video in this series, that my two favorite poets are Charles Bukowski and Emily Dickinson. With Bukowski, if you read 20 Bukowski poems, there's going to be at least one where it feels like it was never revised, where it feels like those were words that Bukowski put on the page and never looked at again, and someone found them later and put them in a collection. With Emily Dickinson, if you take an excerpt of 20 of her poems and look at them, there's going to be at least one that just feels like words on paper. And you have to wonder if there's maybe something you're not understanding, if there's something that you don't get, but it seems like the poem itself doesn't make sense. In this collection, even in the last video of this series, as we did the poem by poem breakdown of this collection, there's a poem titled Polyphemus, which I didn't understand. But there was never a moment in my reading where I thought Jen didn't understand it. So you never feel like you were with someone who doesn't know what they're doing. The three worst things about this: number one, this is a signed copy, so I can't mark it up. Now, that being said, I would be remiss as a writer, as a reader, as a critic, and as someone who hopes that he is friendly with the Jen Campbell, if I did not make an attempt at this section of the review. Number two, but the first actual criticism, I'm a fan of the narrative poem. Tell me a story with funny margins and pretty words, and that's poetry enough for me. To my reading, Kitchen is the closest to that type of poem in this collection. And again, this is not to say that the rest of these poems aren't poems, or that the rest of them are not valid. It's for me, in my reading and my readership, I'm a big fan of the narrative poem. I like stories. And the rest of these, a lot of the rest of these would be classified probably as a narrative poem, but they're not quite as direct, again, as for example, Bukowski. And three, I hope I'm referring to this in the correct way. This is a limited variety that creates a larger varietal. That is, if we could use wine as an example, there are a lot of the same grapes in most of these poems, which is probably why they ended up in a collection together. But they go to create a lot of different tasting Chardonnays, right? There are things that you do to the grapes after you pluck them to make a Chardonnay taste different, depending on how you want that Chardonnay to taste. And again, and this is so hard to present as a criticism, but a lot of the same themes pop up in these poems. Again, this is something that's also very difficult to do when you've interacted with the author. And I hope that this does not sound derogatory in any fashion, but the limited variety into a varied varietal leaves some of the poems feeling like a memory of another poem in here. Which maybe that's the point of them. I'm not going to say that it's not. Three themes and literary qualities. 16 of the 20 poems in this collection have some nomenclature of water involved. Classically, water is about cleansing or rebirth / baptism. This is water used to make saltwater castles. These are poems that remind us that you can't breathe underwater. And in Crosshatch, it is the rain that makes us wonder if the class Hutchie is hitching her skirt. So I think that this is not water which speaks precisely to baptism. It's a water of life. It is the water of sustenance. It is the water of nature. And in nature, water can be just as destructive as it is a power for, or as much destruction, as much a part of destruction as it is growth. Cleansing and rebirth are your ideas. They don't belong to the water. But if cleansing and rebirth happen because of the water, hey, they're there. 2, immediacy, intimacy, and sensuality are blurred in the universe of this collection. This is started in the very first poem, Kitchen, where we get the lines, "Your mother would be home soon." And later, "We heard a key turn in a front door, somewhere by the shore. I'd like that, you said, and kissed me." The intimacy and sensuality of a lover unperturbed by the immediacy of a family member. And 13 of the 20 poems in this collection mention family and or acts that fall somewhere on the sexual scale, starting with kissing and moving up. I will note that most of the mentions of family or sexuality are mentions of family, not sexuality. I don't want this to sound like Jen just threw together 20 smut poems and put it in a collection. I don't want it to sound like that at all. But there is something to be said for the idea of Freudian intimacy in this piece. And the idea of Freudian intimacy is that once we decide we love someone, there is a transference that happens, and we start treating the person who we think or believe or know that we love based on the model of love that we have, right? So, for example, someone who comes from a household in which the parental relationship is very abusive is probably going to, once they decide they love someone, undergo a moment of transference, after which the relationship becomes abusive. This is something that happens time and time again. And what we see in here is that this idea of intimacy, the flip of Freudian intimacy in this collection is a flip to acceptance, which leads me into the third theme from the collection, which is the theme of otherness. Otherness is a fairly common topic in poetry, but it is not always handled with such grace as it is in this collection. Jen tackles the subject of otherness by presenting those who accept rather than those who shun. So let's examine this image of otherness. In The Lobster Girl, we get the quote of the sea, which again goes back to the theme of water. And I think that it is important to note the difference between the sea and a river, for example, right? Or still water, yet again. The sea holds mystery and exotic new forms. And exotic new forms of beauty, I'm sorry. Even in today's world where mystery and the exotic are ever fading. So those are 3 of the themes from this. 3 questions for further discussion. Number 1, and this is going to seem like harping at this point in the series, but I want to know what is going on with Polyphemus. I want that poem explained to me by someone who gets it, because it's not that I look at that and see that there is nothing there. It's just that there is something going on there, and I don't understand it, but I want to. 2, this isn't a question so much as a musing, but I would like to see earlier drafts of Treading Water to see how it got to that, how it got to be what it is. Because treading water. I was birthed in the Tyne on a fluorescent buoy, kept afloat by its placenta. Both of us ballooned. My eye a coin of seagulls mothering. We all come out of these wombs, swimming for 6 months, we can breathe like that. I want to see how a poem gets to that place. The revisions through which it had to go to become so esoteric, but contained within itself. Because again, as I've mentioned several times through this series, that's something I can't do with my writing. I don't have that tool. I don't have that capability, and I would like to have it. In 3, I would like to know your impression of the age of the characters in Kitchen. To me, every time I read this poem, I see people in their early to early mid-20s, but I have no basis for that. And I can see any myriad of answers being thrown in there, which I would completely accept as valid, as that's what's going on there. I can imagine any age of people thrown into that poem. 3 recommendations based on the Hungry Ghost Festival by Jen Campbell. Number 1, we're going to get into a little bit with the next video in this series, but that would be 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver. Go read 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver and tell me this is not better than that collection. I defy you. I dare you. I double dog dare you to tell me that 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver is better than this. And I will argue you until I have nothing left in me. But again, and we'll get into this a little bit in the next video in the series, it's difficult to find poets. And it's difficult to find poets that aren't Mary Oliver and aren't Billy Collins, right? But there's validity here. This is talent. This is something that is worth reading. But you can't just go out to your Barnes & Noble and find this. And it's just, I don't know. I'll get into it a little bit more in the rant. It's going to be a bit of an angry rant for a moment. But number 2, the second recommendation from this collection, Don't Go Far Off by Pablo Neruda, and compare it to what's going on in Kitchen. And then you have an analytical essay due on my desk Friday. But I think that there's a lot of comparisons to be made between those 2 poems. The differences, the similarities, the wordplay, the intimacy involved. I think there's something there. And the third recommendation is Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. You knew Bukowski was going to be mentioned again. And compare Bluebird by Charles Bukowski to how Jen uses lobster in Lobster Girl. Bluebird in the air, a red lobster in the sea. A bluebird is a very passive idea for a poet as aggressive as Bukowski, and a lobster is an idea that is rather aggressive for someone whose poetry reads as relaxed as Jen's. I think that again, there's something to be had between those poems, a conversation between those ideas, if you will. This essay will be due the Friday after next, and it will be worth half your semester grade. Finally, a rating for the Hungry Ghost Festival by Jen Campbell. I give this 88 diaries from 1999 out of 100. It is something that I thoroughly enjoyed. And it's something that helped me transform my poetry readership. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you hit like and subscribe. Make sure you check out Jen's channel, which will be linked in the description below, as well as where you can buy Jen's work. And I hope to see you for the rant, which is the 4th part in this 5-part series.